No objectors, it seemed to me. So, and there's one urgent update, which I think everybody will have seen. So, unless anybody wants to speak, then I would suggest we move straight to the vote and don't worry about the presentation. Agreed? Okay. So, is everybody in favour of approving subject to conditions? We've done it. Okay.
Can we have a proposal in a second?
Oh, we need a proposal in a second. It's not like minutes, is it? The two head call members. You can choose which is the proposal and which is the seconder. Okay. I do apologise, members, for that. I think you may have to put your hands up again. Are we all okay? Four. Yeah. We have a proposal and seconder. Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
I think it's unanimous. Okay, Mr. Jarrett, you don't have to speak. Good.
To the application.
Yeah, and the application's approved. Councillor Round, did you want to just make a very brief statement?
Thank you very much, Chair. For those who don't know, this has been an ongoing issue for many, many years, right back to when I used to live there 55 years ago. So I would like to thank the planning officer and the team for having come up with this and been able to present it finally to planning committee, and thank that team immensely. I'm absolutely delighted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very nice words, I think. Good. Hear, hear. Right. Sorry? I suppose I should do. It's all been agreed. Technically, can I ask you, I should have done this before in my excitement. Has anybody been lobbied on this one? One we disapproved? Because I haven't been.
I was lobbied by Councillor Round.
Does that count? All right. So you got the three. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, members. I should have done that. It's item 14, page 32, and it's reference 16/505-966, which is the Railway Tavern, Station Road, Staplehurst, Kent. And I'll hand over to the officers for this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an application for change of use and conversion of the Railway Tavern to one dwelling and the erection of a new detached dwelling with parking and landscaping. I've got a couple of procedural items to update members on. Firstly, obviously, this application was withdrawn from the agenda on the 16th of March. The reasons for withdrawal was to allow public consultation on the viability appraisal, and we've obviously had comments since that time. I would also draw your attention to the urgent update report that sets out an issue where a financial offer for the freehold of the premises was received. However, notwithstanding that, the offer was very low, and on that basis it was recommended that offer be rejected, and that is set out in members' urgent updates. I've also got an issue that I was notified today, very late in the day, at about 12 o'clock, that the Parish Council had submitted an application to register the pub as an asset of community value. I got notified of this today. They got notified to our property services team yesterday. So, unfortunately, that has come forward. However, notwithstanding that matter, we have some legal advice on that matter, and I'll hand you over to the legal officer to address that particular point.
Thank you. We were approached this afternoon just to have a look at what the effect of the application would be. Now, our view is that the effect of a building being listed as an asset of community value is that if the property is subsequently sold, then it must be offered to the community before offering it on the open market. Now, what you need to be aware here is that the building has not yet been listed, and it has only recently been purchased. Second point is, when it's listed, you lose your permitted development rights. Here, we are not relying, or the applicant is not relying on permitted development rights. They've submitted a full application. 3, if the building had been listed, and it hasn't, then the listing would be a material consideration when the application that comes forward is assessed. So the bottom line is that even if a listing had been made, it would only affect the future disposal of the property. And 2, if a listing had been made, and it hasn't, it would merely be an additional material consideration to be taken into account as part of the application process. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell, for that. I'll hand over to you, James.
Thank you, Chair. I will carry on with the presentation. It's just important that was noted. As I said, very late in the day, the Parish Council registered it, and I think it was important you had an update from the legal officer as to the implication of that. Turning to the application itself, as I've previously said, this is the conversion of the tavern to one dwelling and the erection of a new detached dwelling with parking and landscaping. So this is the aerial photograph. So this is the tavern. This is its garden area, and this is the car parking area. So the boundary, the red line, effectively runs around this area and around here. What in effect would be taken away is this flat-roofed part of the element here and some minor external alterations to the listed building which are considered by the Conservation Officer to be an enhancement to it. There would be a new dwelling erected in this location, and you'll see what that new dwelling will look like when I go through the presentation. So in terms of the going through the plans, you've got the Railway Tavern, and just in the background there, you've got the newsagents, the village newsagents shop, and you've got the parking area just here. This is, again, the newsagents and the parking area, so this is where the new dwelling would be proposed. Effectively shows the area of the parking area, and it goes into the existing pub garden towards the back of the site there. This is the block that I was talking about that's proposed to be demolished and removed from the site. Again, some more views of the block to be demolished. And then again of the Grade 2 listed building. And this is just looking from Station Road. So turning to the existing elevations, you've got the west and the east elevation, north and south, the existing floor plans of the listed building. And in terms of the proposals, as you'll note, you'll see that single floor extension has been removed. This is converted. Some internal alterations are carried out to make the plan form more sympathetic to the dwelling, and you'll see the Conservation Officer's comments relate that in the listed building element, where he says in principle he supports the proposals both on the setting and in terms of the fabric and character of the listed building. And then you've got the new dwelling to be replaced in here, which is a 4-bedroom dwelling with living accommodation on the ground floor, a bedroom, and then 3 bedrooms on first floor with parking, and you see the division of the plot. In terms of upper floor plans, effectively this is first floor, 3 bedrooms, and there'll be 2 bedrooms in the second floor element, and that's in the listed building element. And on the new build, you've got 3 bedrooms in this area here. Again, in terms of street scene elevations, so you've got the newsagents here, the new dwelling front elevation, the Grade 2 listed building. That is the flank elevation, so that's looking down this elevation here. This is looking at the new dwelling from here with the garage set back. You've got the rear of the listed building, and you've got the rear of the new dwelling proposed with the newsagents back here. And then likewise, you've just got a section through the building showing here. So in terms of the key issues to consider, these are set out in the report. And the principal key issue to consider in accordance with section 38(6) of the Act is policy R11, and in relation to paragraph 7 of 70 of the MPPF. The issue with regard to the weight to be attached to policy R11 is its consistency with the MPPF. So I would regard that policy R11 of the adopted local plan is consistent with the MPPF, therefore it can be carried full weight on that basis. So the application needs to be assessed in accordance with that policy. The applicant has submitted a viability report to address those key points. Now, they are set out in the report in terms of what are the 4 points that they need to make, that need to be assessed against, and these are clearly set out in the viability report and set out in the officer's report. In effect, the viability report concludes that there are a number of local public premises in the wider area which have better trading potential, and that there are sufficient public houses in the locality to cater for the demand. The report sets out that there are 10 public houses within a 3-mile radius, and of these 10, 1 of these is within the village and 4 are within 2-mile radius of the village. So this is clearly set out in the viability appraisal and set out in the officer's report. It also concludes that the premises has been marketed with no offers which reflect its market value, and I would draw members' attention to what's set out in the report before members and also what's set out in the urgent update report, because while there has been an offer, that offer is very low and is not considered to reflect the market value of the property. Also, point number 3, it is uneconomical to invest the capital required to bring the tavern to a standard that customers would expect. So in terms of the viability issue and the trading potential would not allow for a reasonable profit to be maintained. These are all set out in the viability report, and as I said, they've been out to public consultation. So the overall conclusion of the viability report is that the public house is not viable to trade as a public house. Now, the officer's view is that those fulfil the criteria of policies 1 to 4. So in terms of the evidence base, there is an evidence base to demonstrate that point. With regard to the impact on the listed building and the applications of Section 16 and 66 of the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act, the Conservation Officer raises no objection to the proposals, and again this is endorsed by the officer within the report, setting that the proposals represent a positive improvement to the setting of the listed building with enhanced benefits to the listed building by the removal of inappropriate additions and finding a long-term viable use for the building. These are significant material considerations that weigh in favour of the application as endorsed by the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act and the MPPF. So overall, the application is to consider to comply with development plan policy and is recommended for permission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, James. Right. Who's been bid on this?
Can we say who hasn't?
I think the answer is who hasn't.
Who hasn't been nominated?
Councillor Hensley hasn't. I think we've all been except Councillor Hensley. Okay?
Yep.
Good. Okay, I'd like to call on Mr. Lenham, who's an objector. Go on. Yes, you have 3 minutes. I think you probably know the rules. But,
Good evening, everybody. This is being portrayed as just the inevitable loss of another unimportant pub, but it is not. Important though the pub business is, the site itself is the vital local amenity. If we say that we want sustainable communities and reduced car use, then now is the time when our actions must match our words. Settlements like Staplehurst must be allowed to meet their own basic social, commercial and employment needs. We cannot be a rural service centre without any services. We need businesses, but more fundamentally we need places where businesses can be run. Instead, however, we are losing site after site to housing. This is one of the best we have left, and your officer has failed to appreciate its huge significance in this local context. He correctly states that the NPPF saved policy R11, the emerging LP and the adopted Staplehurst NP all set up a presumption against the loss of sites like this one. But the NPPF goes further. In the same paragraph, it states that planning decisions must ensure that established shops, facilities and services are able to develop and modernise in a way that is sustainable and be retained for the benefit of the community. This couldn't be clearer. All commercial, social or employment users for a site should be considered in preference to the loss of that site, which is what conversion to residential use represents. So although the applicants have attempted to prove that A4 use will never be viable, that alone simply wouldn't be enough, even if it was true. Yes, a report they paid for alleges that nobody can run a pub viably on this site ever again. Well, it would, wouldn't it? But publicans themselves insist repeatedly in writing that they could, despite attempts to misrepresent their views, and alternative assessments strongly agree with them. The truth is that pubs stand or fall on the quality of their management, and the premises themselves are a secondary factor. At best, this report is one educated but contested opinion, not proof, and as I have said, even conclusive proof would not by itself be enough. Your officer acknowledges interest in this site from publicans and a whole variety of other businesses, yet he maintains that only residential use is viable because the site has not been resold. Well, it requires two willing parties for a transaction to take place. Mr. Allen relates in detail how genuine interest was obstructed and then misrepresented. By demanding a price unjustifiable for the present usage class, the owners ensured no sale would take place, except perhaps to another developer. It is reasonable to assume that the other interested parties were treated in the same way. This is not evidence of non-viability. It is a fabricated narrative and must be disregarded. There is nowhere near enough genuine evidence to justify overturning national, borough and parish planning guidance here. The benefit and viability claims do not stand up to scrutiny, and approval would significantly harm Staplehurst's ability to meet its non-residential needs in a period of intense growth. Ultimately, you need to decide whether you are going to help the RSCs cope with the massive housing expansion they have been allocated, or let us be hollowed out into silent dormitories for short-term profit. I urge you to take the longer-term view, refuse this opportunistic application and send a strong message that you will not look kindly upon neglect of the building being used to justify future applications. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lennon. Thank you. Call on Councillor Mrs. Buller, please.
Okay, sorry about that. Right, don't start yet. Right. Staplehurst Parish Council wants this application refused for the following reasons: loss of a village public house, withdrawal of access to neighbouring station newsagents. This site is near a bus stop, junctions and fast traffic coming to Staplehurst over the bridge. Loss of the shared tavern car park and a second access would impact on highway safety. There are some drainage issues here as part of the car park sometimes floods. Building over this area could potentially send this water elsewhere. We support Kent Highways' concerns over adequate parking provision on the site. Staplehurst is designated as a rural service centre with a huge housing expansion planned, yet we are becoming less sustainable. We have lost 3 pubs to housing in recent years and have just 1 pub left. The applicant highlights that there are other pubs in a 3-mile radius, but none of these can be accessed on foot. Are we encouraging drink driving? Maidstone Integrated Transport Strategy promotes walking or cycling rather than using the car. Policy GW1 of Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan proposes the need for the regeneration of the station area. This loss of a nearby economic and social infrastructure does not make sense. Page 44 of our plan shows how the whole area, including the tavern site, is a key feature of our parish and must be protected. This application is also in conflict with Save Policy R11 and Immersion Plan Policy SP10, paragraph 5, which both state that loss of local shops and community facilities will be resisted. The MPPF Section 70 also guards against unnecessary loss of valued facilities and services. The parish council has asked for the tavern to be designated as an asset of community value, and we expect to hear the result in early May. The neighbour at Station Newsagents needs his access to the rear of his property protected. If this plan is passed, the new dwelling will block this access. The MPPF in Section 66 states that applicants should work closely with those directly affected and take into account the views of the community. This has clearly failed. When determining this development, the whole area needs to be considered. There's a shop next door, a post box, a bus stop, a nearby station, industrial area, and the site is on our primary route, the A229. This is a very busy area. Our village post office may well relocate to Station Newsagents. Changing the Railway Tavern site will have an adverse impact on its surroundings. This area has always worked well with the tavern sharing access and parking for the good of all. This application is in breach of so many policies. Staplehurst is promoted as a wonderful, sustainable location. We must have a thriving social and economic heart to support our growing population. We do not need 2 more houses. We must keep our infrastructure and, better still, improve it. This application works against this and so should be refused. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Bullock. Mr Barraclough for the applicant, please.
Good evening. May I deal with drainage and parking, or traffic rather? There's no objection from the various statutory consultees, including Drainage Board and Southern Water. The development by itself will, by reason of its design and landscaping, minimise any perceived flooding. It's all dealt with in your report. The main thing I want to deal with is viability. Well-respected agents, James Baker, who operate throughout the United Kingdom, have sought to market the premises as a public house, but with no success. And the opinion of James Baker is supported by experts, Greensand Asset Management, and their expertise concerns the sale, acquisition and management of pubs. Greensand acted for Enterprise Inns to market the property from June 2015 without success before the current owners came on the scene in November 2015. Management of a pub is not the be-all and end-all of it. It's the essence of the pub itself which is important. Now, I have to say this as far as the offer made by Messrs. Allen of the Halfway House, some miles away. They've been given every opportunity to make a sensible offer for the property, having told the agents that they did not think that the pub was viable, that the layout did not lend itself to use as a contemporary licensed premises, thus reflecting the experts' opinions. They now offer less than half the market value days before this meeting. They showed no interest in the property when it was being heavily marketed from June 2015 onwards. It is, we respectfully submit, a derisory offer which is designed to thwart this process. The so-called well-respected and successful publicans, who according to Staunton Lambert think that it is a viable pub, seem to have failed to put their heads above the parapet. We support the officer's opinion with great respect that there is strong evidence that the site is not viable as a pub, and that in any case significant hurdles would be faced by anyone seeking to re-establish it as a pub. Now, the flip side of the officer's recommendations that the proposed development presents significant benefits in terms of providing a viable use for the listed public house and an improvement to the overall character of the site is the reality that if it is not possible to develop these premises, they will remain sterile. They will end up being boarded and vexatious to the character of the area. Right to park. There is no right to park over the property. Any right given to the local newsagent was the subject of a licence which was revoked by notice dated November 2015. The area has been fenced off now for over a year. And any contention that there is some right described as the pub's car park must remain a car park, which will be interfered with, is not a material consideration, we respectfully submit, in the determination of the application. The application is concerned with land use from the viewpoint of public interest, not private rights. Finally, may I say this, one need only look at the photographs to appreciate that this site cries out to be developed sympathetically, as is proposed. I've probably gone over my time, have I? I'm so sorry.
It's all right. I've
You're
allowed
very
everybody
patient.
to go over the time.
I normally get shouted at if I do that. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bryce, please.
Okay, thank you, members. Thank you, Chair. Members have heard me ask in this chamber for Maidstone Borough Council to support sustainability and investment in infrastructure in Staplehurst. Well, here's your opportunity, gentlemen. Tonight, and ladies, I ask you not for investment funds, but to resist unnecessary development. Staplehurst has outlined or full applications for around 750 houses, and these are all to come forward within a few minutes' walk of this northern area of Staplehurst. Further, this northern area of Staplehurst is allocated as an area for economic development in both the MBC local plan and the neighbourhood plan. So I'm surprised that a recommendation would seek to remove an employer and a local facility that would support such economic development. There are several inaccuracies, I feel, or gaps in the viability report based on feedback that I've sought from a local industry consultant, not somebody based in Cornwall, but somebody that's actually worked with this pub for many years. There is no barrelage cited in this viability report, so how can anybody make any conclusions or judgments about actually how much profit, wet or dry, food or non-food, this pub would turn over? The consultant that I spoke to said that there would be a take of around 300,000 and a profit of 55k was feasible. You can further see in the viability report and in other communication between the applicant and the planning officers that they feel that the provision of a pizza van once a week in Staplehurst provides adequate infrastructure for the village, that the fact the cricket club is open to members for a couple of nights a week for a few hours, again, is supposed to be sustainable and sufficient for us. We have an incredibly busy pub, the King's Head. That should indicate to members there is more than enough need, and that's before we get extra housing. But finally, the most important thing for me is in the local plan on page 53, SP 10.5 says that the loss of local shops, community facilities will be resisted by this council in line with the adopted local plan. Members, I ask you to support the local plan that has been agreed by this council. Many thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Right. Before I give the floor to members, I am the ward member, so I am going to speak, if you forgive me, as the ward member, not as the chairman. Staplehurst, in line with Maidstone Borough Council's emerging local plan and Staplehurst Parish Council adopted local neighbourhood plan, is about to go through a major change with circa 700 houses soon to be developed. As been stated in objections, this is not the time to lose an important village facility. The viability issue has been called into question. I would dispute this conclusion. The pub was valued at about 300,000 a little over 2 years ago and was since purchased from a property developer for 355,000 and is now being valued at 420,000, which must be a factor in its viability. I do seriously question the value that's being put on the pub, actually, and the market value is what the market is prepared to pay. And we also understand that there are experienced publicans who consider the pub could be viable if the price was realistic. But I want to emphasise the following points. This proposal is not in this plan, the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan, which we're all very proud of. It is not in it. The housing is not in it. The pub is in it, and the pub has always been part of the neighbourhood plan development. And I think members should be aware of the statement for the Minister of State for Housing and Planning, who confirmed that where a planning application conflicts with a neighbourhood plan that has been brought into force, and everybody approved it, planning permission should not normally be granted. Now, under the emerging local plan, the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan, as I said, we have already 700 houses planned. We do not need any additional houses at this point in time, however small in number, especially as MBC has met its target for a 5-year housing supply. The statement made in paragraph 6.02 of the report, that the emerging local plan designates Staplehurst as a rural service centre and therefore appropriate for new housing development, is incredibly unfair. We have an adopted neighbourhood plan which has taken into account the additional houses that is in the emerging local plan, and we do not need anything more at this stage. As I've already stated, I do not accept the argument that this pub cannot be viable, and I strongly refute the argument set out in the viability report. The only other pub in our village is 1.5 miles away, right at the other end of the village. The village could easily support 2 pubs, particularly with the additional houses coming in. The King's Head, which has been mentioned, as I said, is right at the other end. To argue that there are other pubs close by is also very misleading. All would need a car. One might as well argue that the Brenchley in Maidstone is a local pub to Staplehurst because you have to get to it by car. In my view, a landlord with a free house who would have a choice of supplier can make this pub viable. The proposal appears to be contrary to a number of policies. Change of use is at variance of the NPPF, which refers to an unnecessary loss of value facilities. As already mentioned, it conflicts with SP10 of Maidstone's emerging local plan, where the loss of local shops and facilities will be resisted. It appears to be in conflict with policy GW1 of the neighbourhood plan, which refers to the redevelopment of sites in the railway station area. It conflicts with policy H6 of the neighbourhood plan, which protects the existing employment facilities in the Lodge Road area, which includes this area. It conflicts with objective 12 of the neighbourhood plan, which aims to support a strong local economy with good access to jobs and employment opportunities. But this, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go on a bit, this brings me to another very important issue which is not covered in the report. The long-term viability of the news agency next door will be seriously affected. The shop has provided an important service to our community as at one time actually a sub-post office. The business is reliant on passing trade, but with car parking access being denied and parking restrictions being enforced, this trade has already been badly affected. This is a rural area and customers do use their cars. Not everyone will cycle, even if they can survive the journey. For the past 30 years, customers were allowed to use the pub car park, which is now being denied. In addition, the owner cannot access his own garage, and access for emergency services is now difficult. I won't comment any further on this, but I'll leave you to reflect on this situation. As we've already been reminded, Staplehurst is a rural service centre, but we, as Councillor Bullock rightly said, key facilities that contribute to this classification are fast disappearing. We've lost our bank. Our bus service was rightly described by my colleague as a previous council meeting as infamous, and local businesses are struggling. We can't afford to lose a business such as this that plays an important role in the economy of our life of a village. So I'm going to move something from here straight away, actually, and I'm going to, in conclusion, for all the reasons that I've highlighted, I move that this application be refused for the following reasons. It is contrary to the policies and objections set out in the adopted Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan. It is considered contrary to the the viability report presented, the pub is viable. The possible adverse effects on the local economy. It is contrary to NPPF, which refers to the unnecessary loss of value facilities. And Maidstone has a 5-year housing supply, and additional houses really are not needed. and I move that this application is refused from the Chair. Seconded by Councillor Prendergast. Now I will open the floor, and I think Councillor English, you wanted the floor, then Councillor Hart.
Yes, I think you meant objectives, not objections of the local neighbourhood plan.
English, you're always right. I do apologise.
Secondly, sorry about that. May I also say that I agree with most of what you said, but I think the wording should be something along the lines that the unviability of the pub has not been proven, rather than to say that it is viable. I think that hasn't been proven either. So I think, you probably need to amend the wording in that respect. Otherwise, I'm generally in agreement. Let's not beat around the bush. Enterprise Inns is known nationally for being a company that takes over pubs and runs them down. It is well known. Now, I'm not saying this has happened in this particular case at all. I'm not saying that, but it has happened. What I would say in this particular case, we cannot use any argument any more than in any other application that simply because a listed building or another building is in a poor state, that justifies any development at all. Now, it may be that if a listed building is derelict, decrepit, run down, and there have been a long list of attempted uses that have fallen, or alternatives that have fallen through, that conversion to domestic use is appropriate. It doesn't seem to me that that's the case. Now, turning to the car park issue, well, yes, it's quite true that the council shouldn't be concerned with private issues. Therefore, the fact that it's fenced off and inaccessible is in itself an issue the council should not be concerned with. It is the planning history and use of the site that is relevant, not whether it's fenced off and inaccessible at this particular moment of time. That's a property issue between neighbours. It's whether or not the site has been used for 30 years and whether or not that is the established planning use that's relevant in that sense. So let's put whether you can access it currently to one side. I would say that one of the many things that I do know about is pubs and beer. I could be considered an expert on many of the pubs of Maidstone and its vicinity. I don't claim all that many areas of expertise, but public houses is probably one of them. I am aware of many pubs in and around the Maidstone area that closed, and others that have not. There are pubs in Maidstone that are smaller than this, that have a less attractive layout than this building, First and Last, for example, that are trading very, very successfully. The layout can be a problem, but it is not fundamental to the extent that the approach to running a pub business, like any other retail business, takes. I think one has to be aware that it might be possible to prove that this public house business is unviable, but I think we're some way away from that at the moment. That's leaving aside whether or not there's going to be any change in the customer profile from all the development that Staplehurst and South Maidstone is going to get. One would have thought there'd be some customers. Perhaps I'm wrong, but perhaps everyone who's going to move into South Maidstone is teetotal and never drinks. Well, stranger things might have happened, I suppose. But at the end of the day, the fundamental issue is, unlike with some other applications we discussed tonight, backgrounds for applications, the local plan policy on this is fairly clear, and we have a very recent neighbourhood plan with firm policies which this council should be supporting unless there are really compelling reasons why not. The small amount of housing that we get from these two units, even if we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply, is a minute contribution to Maidstone's housing supply, so small as to be totally irrelevant. The listed building argument, well, we've got to be careful about opening the floodgates to anything in a listed building just because it's empty and a bit run down. So it's a question of whether there is a public interest in removing the community facility and whether or not the viability has been proven to be, something that cannot be turned round. I have to say that at best, the viability report, in my opinion, is unproven. At this stage, I would support the chairman, sorry, he wasn't speaking as chairman, the Staplehurst ward member in turning down this application for the reasons stated.
Thank you, Councillor English. Councillor Harwood, I think you did ask for the floor, didn't you?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't really want to prolong the debate, but there was just one small point. If there is a subsequent appeal, should the committee refuse this application, within the proposed officer recommendation, amongst the conditions, there's no reference to renewable energy generation, which is a standard now in all of our for the new build within our applications, linking into the NPPF and our local plan. I just wanted some explanation from the officers as to even though it's likely that because there's only a motion for refusal currently there, that if this is refused, that we can, when we have any discussions at a subsequent appeal, put in our sample conditions, that our sample conditions do identify the renewable energy generation. This is a large property, and I think it's remiss not to have it in. I just want that assurance.
Do you want to go for it?
I'll deal with that point first. There's a number of ways you could do it. You could put it as a record, as a second motion on this, that you wish, in terms of the officers defending the appeal, they wish condition X to refer to renewable energy. So it's certainly something that we could take on board on that particular point. I would just like to go through a couple. I don't want to prolong the debate. I can see where members are taking it. There are a number of key issues that I need to set out. Before we progress, one of those issues, I know what Councillor English turned around. Obviously, Enterprise Inns aren't the applicant. They were the previous owners, so they're not, in terms of supposition, what they did do, members have to be very careful because they're in their accounts records and everything else that come forward with this, and there's no wet beer sales for this. You have to be very careful in terms of what you say in the public domain on that basis, but Enterprise Inns aren't the owners. This is a different owner in this application. With regard, and I clearly pointed out the balancing exercise, where I referred to the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act and the duty, the officers have balanced that consideration and have added weight to that, and in effect added significant weight to that basis. That's what members would need to do in the consideration of their balancing exercise. So you just need to bear that in mind, because that is a significant factor in favour of the scheme by securing a long-term use, and obviously in terms of what the officer, which is agreed by the conservation area, that currently the car park doesn't do much to add to the setting. So there are benefits arising from that. Regarding points raised by the chair in quite a long speech on that particular point, I would just refer members to paragraph 6.03 of the original report. Now, I'm not contradicting what the chair says, but I have to be. The officer has said there's no specific policies which relate to the retention or otherwise of the public house, but acknowledges that policy GW1 places the pub at the margins of the railway station, identified for the redevelopment of the public realm improvements. So just for clarification, and also refer members to 615 of the report, where the officer clearly points out that the environmental improvements would seem to accord with the neighbourhood plans aimed to improve the general area around the station and northern approaches to the village. So I'm not saying in terms of what the chair said is wrong, I'm just saying that clearly what the officer's report is saying and how members decide to refer it, just to say it's contrary to the neighbourhood plan, I don't think it contradicts in terms of what's setting out in this plan. If members are going to refuse it, I would ask that they go into detail and set out why it's contrary to the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan, so we clearly know what officers are having to defend in any event of an appeal. I would also agree with Councillor English's assumption that if members are minded to refuse this application, on the basis that if it's refused, you've got a surveyor's report on viability, the council is going to have to engage a surveyor to counter that report in order to come up with evidence, because as an appeal, I can't turn up to an appeal with no evidence and just say on hearsay, I've heard from someone that there's, the costings, you've got in front of you an evidence report, and on an appeal, you would have to go back and get an evidence report that counters that. That is a significant cost issue that arises from the council. I'm not going around significant cost warnings. That's what members need to do to defend it. We'd have to do it. In terms of where you're more likely to go, I would agree that the grounds could probably say insufficient evidence has been submitted, which demonstrates that the operation as a public house is not viable and is unlikely to become commercially viable. You need to link back to policy R11 of the adopted local plan. That is carrying full weight. I did say that its alignment with paragraph 70 affords it more weight. So in this instance, I would say that it carries more weight than the emerging local plan. With regard to the Chair's reference to policy SP10 bullet point 5, well picked out, I might add, that policy also defers back to policy SP53. None of those policies have amendments, modifications proposed. So again, the inspector has considered those and considered that they are, in effect, sound. So they are more weighty, if I use that term. So if members are minded to go down that route, then those policies should also be included, principally on that basis because they are weighty in the determination of this application. So I think on those basis, those are my recommendation. I obviously still stand by the officer's recommendation on the basis that we consider the viability report substantiates that case, but I accept where this debate is moving forward and you have my professional advice on that matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. Councillor Mumford.
I'd like to thank Mr Bailey for that, because that's one of the few times that we've been assisted with planning advice to go forward in the direction we want. So thank you very, very much. It's something I've been asking for. We protected our rural service centres and larger villages with SP10, but all that says is protect. And quite rightly, Mr Bailey's brought up R11, and in R11 you find a simple sentence that says, and unlikely to become commercially viable. Now, the likelihood is non-specific, and we can't gauge that, but we do know the amount of development we're about to put into Staplehurst, and it is more than likely that it's become commercially viable. And so, like Mr Bailey said, I think we need to bring R11 in. And just in case anyone's in any doubt, I've lived in a village that lost its only pub within walking distance about 5 years ago. Probably we didn't notice. However, someone's opened a shed that is within walking distance for 3 nights a week, and that is stuffed full of my community, and a lot of good work is being done there. So you can't afford to lose these assets. The parish council have been very brave. They put themselves at the forefront because what they've done, they've listed it as an asset and it's up for sale. And unless legal tell me different, they've got 6 months to raise the money, to put the money where their mouth is. So we've got the community wanting it. The community actually have put it at the forefront and put themselves at the forefront to secure it by listing it as an asset, but include R11 in your objection if you to take this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. James.
I haven't spoken much tonight, so I'm trying to get my my words in. I'll just have to correct you, Councillor Munsford. It hasn't been listed as asset community value. It has been, an application has been submitted to the property services team. We do not deal with, so there's no assessment been made as to whether it constitutes or fulfils the procedural requirements, and I won't bore you with it, as set out in the Community Right to Bid non-statutory advice note for local authorities. So that assessment hasn't been made at this time. I'm led to believe that that assessment will be made sometime in the first couple of weeks of May, so it's not far off, but let's just want to clear facts. It is not an asset of community value. Only an application has been submitted.
Yeah. With regards to, it's quite clear where we're heading with this. And I just want to draw your attention to the provisions of the Constitution when we are dealing with this sort of application, please. It states, if the Planning Committee makes a decision contrary to the officer's recommendations, a detailed minute of the Planning Committee's reasons, which should be full, clear and convincing, should be made. The officer should also be given the opportunity to explain the implications of any decision contrary to his recommendation. The wording of reasons for refusal should be clearly understood before the Planning Committee votes on a motion to refuse an application, rather than leaving the drafting to officers to do following the meeting, even if this requires the deferral of the application or a short adjournment in order to draft the wording. Now, James has already alluded to some of the issues with regards to the viability. We need the evidence for that. What I would like, before we go to the vote, is that I get a full copy of the recommendation, or sorry, not the recommendation, what is being put forward to the vote. And I'd like to just confer, if I may, with James to check that he is happy with those. And whether or not, for example, we can't just say, contrary to policies in the local plan or the neighbourhood plan, we need to know what those policies are.
Yeah, okay. I don't want to get into a huge, long debate on this. So I'm going to adjourn ever so slightly. Yes. And let's draft this. We're drafting on the hoof is very bad news. So let's get it sorted now. I think I know the way we're going. And then we can vote on something very sensibly. So if you want to go in for a coffee or something, and a banana, Clive. 15. We'll do 15 minutes, so we do it properly, all right?